Hello, everyone. My name is Maureen McDowell. I'm the founder and executive director of Keep St. Pete Lit. We are a literary arts organization based in St. Petersburg, Florida. And this is episode 25 of Typewriter Talks, where we interview local authors to get inside their brain about their writing process. And today we are lucky to have New York Times bestseller Lisa Unger. Thank you, Lisa, for being here with us.
Hi, Maureen. Hi, guys. Thanks for having me on Typewriter Talks. What a great thing. I'm thrilled.
We're lucky to have you in our area, and we've partnered with Keep St. Pete Lit has partnered with you several times. So it's wonderful to have different types of writers that are at different levels in their career to kind of show all the different phases you can be in. So
and I'm a huge fan of Keep St. Pete Lit. It's such a great organization. You do so much for writers and readers in St. Pete, and it's just really, near to my heart. So thanks for letting me hang out with you guys.
Yeah, the first time we met, we partnered with Brookwood School for Girls on a poetry journal, and that was when, like, a couple years before Keep St. Pete Lit had even gotten started. So it was neat to have that introduction to you.
Yeah, that was such an important experience, and I think even a couple years after we started doing that, I did it like 3 or 4 times over the years. Went in and talked. There was one point at which we I edited their anthology, and then we took the girls to Inkwood Books in Tampa and let them have their own book signing.
Oh, I love that.
They signed their books and everything. It was such an exciting event for them and for me, and it was just really positive all around. So that was important and very fun work.
Yeah, it's cool for young people to get their work published and to have that experience, especially if they have the writer bug.
Right, exactly. Yeah, there's really nothing so much as that to just kind of, if you have the writer bug, not everybody does, right? But if you have it, then that's a very energizing moment in your young life to, feel like I can do this, and somebody, believed in me enough to put me in this anthology and, gave me this opportunity. So it can be a very big yes. When, as we all know, as writers, there are lots of no's all the time. So it's always nice to get a big yes.
Agreed. That's why if you have the writer bug, it's almost like a blessing and a curse sometimes. But you got to keep at it, because what else would
you do? It. Just keep writing. That's it.
So what are you working on right now?
Right now, Right now, I am working on the publication of Confessions on the 745, which comes out October 6th, and I am I'm in my editorial work on the book that we'll publish in 2021. So that is, this is always my crazy time. Is usually I'm writing, sort of already thinking about the one that comes even yet next, and editing one and promoting one. So it's always like kind of a little bit of chaos at this moment, but I'm grateful to be doing it all. So just kind of blessed to be stressed mindset.
It's triplets. It's like triplets. But that's great that you even have another, or even I guess it would be planning a baby, because the third book hasn't been birthed yet. So
exactly, it's like this baby's not even born, or we're looking for another baby. I don't know.
But it's cool that you're already have an idea for another book, because how many books do you have now?
So Confessions on the 745 is my 18th novel. And the one that's completed and that we'll publish next year will be number 19. But I don't know. I feel like, so this is just me. This is just the way my mind works. It's always been like this for me. So I never stop thinking about it, and I never stop. I'm also sort of like a research junkie, so I'm constantly reading tons of nonfiction. So a lot, and which really informs my fiction. And a lot of times it kind of sets me on a course of research that gets me hearing a character voice. So that's kind of how my process has always been. So it doesn't ever really stop. It doesn't ever really stop for me. And it's actually harder for me not to write than it is for me to find the time and the space to write. Like, it's actually, necessary. It's where I exercise all my demons. So I, if there's a reason like travel or promotion or whatever, where there's a couple days in a row where I'm not actually actively working on my manuscript, then those are not good. Those are not good days for anyone.
Yeah, I really get it. Like if I'm not writing actively, it's like I become a bit evil.
Yeah. I mean, you've got to get that energy out, right? I mean, there's really, it can't live in there. It's got to come out.
I like how you explain your process of looking at nonfiction books, because I've recently started doing that with poetry, because I'm working on a poem about swimming. And it's the first time that I've actually gotten books that I'm reading for research to inform a poem. And it's been a really interesting process, and it's taking like longer, like several months, and I'm still working it out, but I have 2 books on swimming and the history of swimming. And so is that always the way that you've started with the writing, is by looking through nonfiction books to kind of get ideas?
It's not even just a matter of I'm looking for ideas. It's just that I'm an information junkie. Like that's my base level, right? Like I just want as much information as I can get. And so I'm going to read, I'm going to listen to podcasts, I'm going to, watch the news, I'm going to look at crime shows. That's just what that's what I consume as a reader. And usually, and I mean, obviously sometimes I'm in a story or following a character voice, and I might like sort of, run into the stone wall of my own ignorance and have to do some research about a certain topic. But I most often, sort of get my inspiration or get my ideas, or not even get the ideas, but just sort of it informs that idea engine. Just with the knowledge that comes from travel, from, living life authentically, from reading everything I can get my hands on, fiction and nonfiction all the time. I mean, I've always got like 5 books.
Oh, I do too. Hello. I'm an information junkie too.
Exactly.
I have this voracious appetite for life, and I just want to like learn, which is a very, we both have children that are the same age, and it's a very solitary pursuit, the pursuit of information. So you're lucky that
and I feel like my daughter's kind of got that as well. I mean, she's very much the same way. Like she'll get interested in something and start researching, and that's like very much like her Montessori education, like that she came up through that educational process where one spark of interest leads you to another spark of interest, and eventually that's how you educate yourself. And that's, I think a really good model, and probably the way most of us learn best. And even as adults, if you're sort of continuing that education, but, you take in this information, like you were saying about your poem, and you don't even I don't even know where it's going to surface or where it's going to come up. I find, a lot of books I read about birds and about nature and, all of that kind of stuff like that, those things flow into the work, and, you don't know where or when or how it's going to inform or layer what you're working on.
That's the exciting part.
Yeah.
Exactly. The reader brain, I call it the reader brain, like injects something. It's like, where'd that come from? Even in conversation, like, whoa, is that right? Is that the right context? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So what is a typical day like for you as a writer?
You mean before or after the pandemic, or what are we calling
it? Either, like,
I mean, it really does, and I laugh, but it really doesn't change. My golden creative hours are from 5 a.m. to noon. Like that's my best space for writing. I mean, and that's also to say that, I'm a professional writer. I have contracts and deadlines and whatnot. So if I don't get the time I need in that space, I find it elsewhere. It's not so precious. Like, oh, I must write during these hours, or I can't write at all. No, nothing like that. So, but that, I mean, those early hours, hours are, and this is what I tell all aspiring writers who are like just really struggling to find the time. Like there are these golden hours that nobody wants, and they are like from 4 to 6 a.m. Yeah. Right? Like those are the hours that you take when you have a tiny baby, when you have a full-time job, when you're, all that stuff. Like those are, for me, when I was, working a full-time job, like 4 to 6 a.m., like that was like, my golden time. So now I sleep in, until 5, and have a little more time. But it really isn't so much about the time of day. It's really so much about waking up and still holding on to that dream brain.
Yeah.
So you can roll into the creative stuff. And, you know, so it really doesn't matter whether it's 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. as long as you get straight to what you're doing. Although I do find like the dark hours of early morning to be the most like sort of fiction friendly. It's before everybody gets up, you know, or your editor wakes up, you know, your actual editor or your internal editor.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's before, you know, all that time. So those are really my golden creative hours. And then, you know, I try to, things are a little bit wonky right now because Ocean, my daughter, is home, you know, virtual learning. So I'm kind of, you know, a little bit beholden to her schedule. But then I try to batch the more shallow work of being a, you know, being a writer, like the social media, the, you know, email, all that stuff. I try to batch that work towards the afternoon after the big creative stuff is done. Because I find that, you know, if you don't do that, then you're really in trouble. If you try to insert that work at some point during your creative break, you're never going back to the creative, right? So it's super easy to switch off because your brain gets tired and it wants that like dopamine hit of like, what's on this, what's on that, and then like to get it to go back to the work of writing is very difficult. Not impossible, but you know, better not to have to, you know, double down your attention to go back to that space. So I try to batch that work in the afternoon. And then now, you know, since my daughter has just been home, you know, forever, every afternoon, we just try to go out and do our exercise together. We try to get out and swim or walk or go to the park or take the dog and everything. So that's kind of our afternoon stuff. And then, you know, evening is homework and maybe I could grab one more creative cycle in the evening or one more, you know, sort of shallow work, like from, I don't know if you ever read Deep Work by Cal Newport.
I love that book. Yeah.
It was a total game changer for me.
For me too. We brought that up in Typewriter Talks.
Yeah. And so I you know, so I really try to stick with that batching, that idea of batching. And you know, I'm a writer, so I'm a creative, so you know, it can't be the same every day. Like that's never going to be who I am. But the most important thing is that everything just is in its like spot.
I'm the same way.
Yeah.
Segments.
Yeah. Because
the kid kind of bleeds into it, but you know.
Well, yeah, I mean, and Ocean comes first, and she always has. So that's the thing. You know, I've got Ocean for 5 minutes, you know, and I'm taking every single one. So that's always my priority. And you know, luckily with, you know, Jeff, as you know, we call him the guy in the chair.
Jeff's so wonderful. Yeah.
The guy in the chair. So he's, you know, with his support, I'm able to kind of manage these two like sort of high level goals, which is like be the best writer I can be the best mom I can be. And, you know, hopefully we'll get everything else in that, you know, in that mix gets done at some point.
Yeah. And it's good to talk about parenthood as a creative, you know, sometimes it's not even discussed, but you know, especially as a woman writer, like you have to carve out time for your creativity. And I'm teaching my daughter that. She's an artist, and it's like sometimes you need to be selfish to be yourself, you know, like
you just have to have those boundaries to say, you know, this is the time to work. But you know, I think that we can really, and this is something that's come up a lot in conversations just about working from home in general, because all of a sudden now that's a big conversation, right? Like all of a sudden, you know, people are very like much so trying to navigate this new thing for themselves. But you know, since she was small, you know, I've always worked in the early morning, and so either she was up, you know, or she was, you know, I tried to get up before her, but she's always been this insane early riser. And so I just kind of taught her as a little person, like, hey, this is the time when we're creative. So here's your stuff and here's my stuff. And so even now, she's an early riser, she immediately gets up and starts working on her schoolwork or starts working on her artwork or whatever it is that she's inspired. And so I feel like that's a really important lesson for creatives and for anybody who's got something that's important to them. Like, you find your time and you create the space, and then you honor that every single day. And that's how you become great at whatever it is you want to do. It doesn't not necessarily have to be writing. You can, it's art or, photography or knitting or whatever it is, like whatever your creative goal is. It doesn't even necessarily need to be how you're making your living. But if you can devote that space and that mental time and energy to it, I think it really enhances your life in a way that you can't understand if you're not doing that. Does that make sense?
And it adds up. That's the thing. Like,
yeah.
doing a little bit every day adds up. Like a page a day can write you a 350-page book of fiction,
That's correct. That's right. And I think Cal Newport even talks about that. It's the process of accretion. Tiny little bit every single day. That's really all it takes. If you only have an hour a day, and you're disciplined and focused in that time, you can accomplish so much with just a small amount of time.
I did the same thing with my daughter. I popped in a DVD, and that was my writing time. And it's now, I let her know, like, okay, I'm going to go and write. And she's doing her art, and she, like, when she gets because she's an introvert, if she's with her friends and she gets burned out, she knows I need a down day for myself to recoup before school starts on Monday. And you just teach them, how to have boundaries for themselves and how to do self-care by modeling you.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and it's such an important gift to give to young creatives, because I think that a lot of times, the creative, there's not a lot of permission. Like, you don't have a lot of cultural permission to just say, I'm going to be creative today. And so when you have somebody who, has that kind of belly of fire for whatever, art, for whatever art they're pursuing, then to give them the permission and the space to be that person and to teach them that, it's great to be inspired and to have, this talent, but there's also a discipline and a work ethic to this that will require you to dedicate yourself at a certain time every single day to this project, whatever it happens to be. And I think if you can teach a young creative that, and they can carry that forward into their lives, even if what they wind up pursuing is not a creative enterprise, they'll always have the gift of that creative time, and it will enhance their life, even if it's not what they eventually make their living doing.
Amen. Good topic. Good topic. We covered a lot of ground there. So for writers that are readers who aren't familiar with your work, what are some of your major themes?
So I write very, very character-driven psychological suspense. And so my major sort of curiosity and the thing that drives me most is just this desire to understand human nature. The human mind is the ultimate mystery. We know more about space than we know about our own brain. And so that for me is an endless topic of exploration in my novels and in my research and in my life. So I would say identity is a big theme that runs through most of my books. What makes us who we are? Is it nature? Is it nurture? Is it some impossibly complicated helix of those things?
Yeah.
The corrosion of secrets and lies within families. We're kind of sold this like idea of what the family looks like, right? And then very few of us are living in that, public Thanksgiving commercial, right? Like very few of us are experiencing that life. So the undercurrents and the power dynamics within a family is something that, that tends to come up again and again for me. The aftermath of trauma is something that I spend a lot of time thinking about and exploring in my fiction. So I think it's important, especially when we talk about crime fiction, that the women in my novels, they may have been victimized by something that occurred in their lives, but they are not victims.
Yeah.
These are all people that are sort of clawing their way back to a new normal, or trying to understand something horrible that happened to them, or, you know, looking for redemption, or maybe even revenge in some cases. And so most of my novels sort of focus on pretty powerful, if, you know, somewhat damaged people.
Well, we're all, I
Yeah,
think, powerful and somewhat damaged. I
yeah,
mean, you know, at least I am.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
and,
exactly.
and talking about families, I mean, your themes, like they're never ending resource. We had Craig Pittman on here and we were talking about the state of Florida, how it's the gift that keeps on giving of stories. And it's the same thing with like families and all these dynamics in the human mind. Like it's like space. You can just keep going and going.
You could just keep going and going and going. And so, you know, some of the books sort of, you know, touch, you know, sort of foray a little bit into the supernatural, but only insofar as, you know, there's natural phenomena that we understand, and then there's natural phenomena that we don't understand. So it's not like paranormal or anything like that. It's just a sort of a Jungian exploration of the psyche and the mind, and what's possible and what isn't possible. So again, and also Carl Jung is a source of, you know, continuing obsession for me. So those Jungian themes, you know, find their way also into the work again and again.
I get you. So what would be the piece of advice you would give your younger writer self?
My younger writer self, I think, just write. You know, that I think that's the advice that I would give every young writer, including the young me. Like, I think, and especially now in this day and age, like young writers like just have this idea that they're, you know, that there's some big publishing like award that could be given to them, right? So they're gonna get this big book contract, and it's gonna be the end of something, right? But the book contract is nothing more than an open door to the writing life. And even for every writer, whether you're an aspiring writer or whether you're an award-winning and best-selling author, it never stops being about the writing.
Yeah.
It never stops being about the page. Every day I sit down and I try to be a better writer today than I was yesterday. And that is always my goal. That's what has driven me through my career. Nothing else motivates me the way that does, that I can go, okay, today I can do better, right? Like that's sort of where I still am. Like I'm still in that beginner's mind every day. And I think that you should stay there. I truly do. No matter how much mastery you may or may not have over your craft, I think you can always be in that beginner's mind, because it's a very joyful place to be. Mm-hmm. And as soon as you're in the mind of other things, as soon as you're worried about publishing, worried about X and Y and Z, all these external things that you do not control, then you have walked away from the page. And the page never stops being the most important thing for any writer. So that's my advice to all writers. Don't, especially young writers, don't worry about publishing. You may or may not publish. We all know this, right? Like it should be incidental. That goal should be incidental to your getting better at your craft every day.
I love that. And just the excitement of writing, like of getting a sentence right, or I mean, I just get so amped on it. Like this is the coolest thing ever.
You know, you came to writing, and most of us did. Those of us who have been writing since we were kids. Yeah. I have been.
Me too.
You came to writing because of, I think, reader joy.
Yes.
You know, you read something that filled you with joy and wonder, and or a language like elevated your thinking about something. And then real writers have a moment where they think, wow, I wonder if I can do this too. Can I also create a world and a person and a story or a poem or whatever? Can I also do this? And so you have that moment and you come to it with joy.
Yeah.
And that's a gift. that's a real gift. Like, to be creative and to have a joy and to know the joy of creation is a tremendous gift. And you never ever want to lose sight of that and let the external the external world of, am I getting it published? Am I good enough? Am I X or Y or Z? You never want those things to take away that joy.
I love the term reader joy.
Yeah.
It is like the ultimate, besides writing, like the ultimate drug to me.
You know that feeling like, oh, this is going to be so great, right? Like, that is, everybody's looking for that from, when they open a book, and it's definitely something that you never want to lose. And you can lose it. You can let it get taken away from you, but you have to hold on to it.
So speaking of books, who are some of your favorite authors?
Some of my favorite authors, like, of all times.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so I always go back to Truman Capote. I think his short story, he's got a number of collections, Other Voices, Other Rooms, and Music for Chameleons. And as a young reader, I think that's really where I fell in love with language.
Oh yeah.
And I feel like I, really like, the idea that he was able to create these like vignettes and take, kind of transport you to these other little worlds, right? Some of it's fiction, some of it's nonfiction. And it kind of awakened me. And then later as a writer, I discovered In Cold Blood.
Yeah.
It's nonfiction. It's the first true crime book ever written. And I think in reading that book, probably too young, the way I read most things too young, it gave me permission to be who I was as a writer, because I always had this very deep curiosity about the dark side of human existence. And I think In Cold Blood made me understand that you could explore that, but you could do it with compassion, and you could do it with sort of breathless beauty, and you could understand people try to understand people who were so far from your own experience and embody those people. And so that, that's somebody that I go back to again and again as like one of my formative writers. Then of course I'm a literary omnivore. I've read everything from the time I was a little kid. Like, anything I could get my hands on, it did not matter. Science fiction, romance, like everything from V.C. Andrews to the Bronte sisters.
Yeah, Flowers in the Attic. Yes.
To Stephen King, to Sidney Sheldon, and then, Shakespeare and all of it, like classic literary fiction, just kind of taking it all in. But I feel like my first thriller was Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, which still, to me, still stands up when you pick it up, and it's still, talk about that, like, reader joy, like immediately transported to Manderley. And I think that was like my first thriller. And I think that was just a moment for me where, this like idea of this like young girl caught in this extraordinary circumstance, and, the kind of big Gothic themes of that and images from that book, so that was an early influence for me. But, my contemporaries, I've been in the industry a long time. I'm lucky to be, friends with some of the most important people writing in the industry. And some of my favorites are Laura Lippman, Lori Roy, Michael Connolly, all of our like local
Lori,
Michael Carita, on the more sort of contemporary side, there's like Lisa Gardner and Karen Slaughter and Alfair Burke and, Greg Hurwitz. And I could just go on and on. So it's kind of a complicated question, but that's the short answer.
But it's also good to show, like, reading across genres really helps with innovative thinking. And people think Absolutely. That, especially young people, like, I'll read a nonfiction book, I'll read a poetry book, I'll read a fiction book, I'll read, like romance, I'll read all across different genres.
There's no reason to discriminate. Story is story. right? And a great story can exist in any genre, you know. And I know this is, you know, a lot also, you know, coming up in traditional publishing, you know, there tends to be you know, a bit of a bias against crime fiction, but some of the best people writing are writing in crime fiction, and at the heart of every story is a mystery. And if
Yeah.
there isn't, really nothing to propel you through through any story. You know, like I always think of, you know, Jane Eyre as being like the ultimate like sort of mystery.
I
And it's
love
like one of my all-time favorite books, right? Like
that.
I've read it many times, every rendition of like every possible movie ever made, like, you know, of that book I have watched. I mean, it's a story that, you know, it's an example of classic literature, but it's also an example of, you know, timeless romance and, you know, deep mystery and trauma and, you know, a coming of age. It's like, you know, it kind of this amazing blend of all these things. So it's like you can't ever imagine that, you know, there aren't great people writing in every format, in every different area.
Yeah. I have a copy of it, and there's no cover, and it's one of those old covers that are like the cardboard covers, and I wrote Jane Eyre on the cover in pen, and it's
Yeah.
the old, and the paper's brown, and it's just like, oh, I love that book. Okay, so one more question, and you might have already answered this. What would be your holy grail piece of writing advice?
My holy grail piece of writing advice, you know, other than just keep writing and, you know, make sure the writing is the most important thing, is, you know, is dig deep, you know, listen to that inner voice, follow that joy, follow the excitement for your subject. You know, don't be external. Don't be looking out at the marketplace. Don't be looking to trends. Don't be emulating. I mean, all early writers and early artists emulate. That's how we learn. But when you're really seeking the story that you want to tell, look within. Don't look without.
I love that, because it's your story, like, and it's only going to come through the way you tell it. And if you don't write it, no one else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay, so let's hear some of your work. Share some writing.
Okay. Yeah, I will. I guess. Well, I mean, you know, so Confessions on the 745 is coming out, and I guess I'll just read from the prologue because it's short. I don't want to lose anybody. Okay,
Yeah,
so
you've got you know, three children to juggle, like 3 books to write and
exactly.
edit. So thank you for taking the time with us. Yeah.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you. She watched. That was her gift, to disappear into the black, sink into the shadows behind and between. That's where you really saw things for what they were, when people revealed their true natures. Everyone was on broadcast these days, thrusting out versions of themselves cropped and filtered for public consumption. Everyone putting on the show of me. It was when people were alone, unobserved, that the mask came off. She'd been watching him for a while. The mask he wore was slipping. He too stood in the shadows of the street, a hulking darkness. She followed him as he drove, circling like a predator, then finding a place for his car under the trees. He'd parked, then sat as the night wound on, and inside lights went out one by one. Finally, he stepped out of his vehicle, closed the door quietly, and slipped across the street. Now he waited. What was he doing? Since she'd been following him the last few weeks, she'd seen him push his children on the swings in the park, visit a strip club in the middle of the day, drink himself stupid with his buddies, viewing a game at a sports bar. She'd watched as he'd helped a young mother with a toddler and baby in a carriage carry her groceries from her car into her house. Once, he'd picked up a woman in a local bar. Then, out in the parking lot, they'd romp like animals in his car. Later, he went on to the grocery store and picked up food for his family, his cart piled high with ice cream and goldfish crackers, things his kids liked. What was he up to now? The observer only sees, never interferes. Still, tonight she felt the tingle of bad possibilities. She waited in the cool night, patient and still. The clicking of heels echoed, a brisk staccato up the deserted street. She felt a little pulse of dread. Was there no one else around? No one else glancing out their windows? No, she was the only one. Sometimes, didn't it seem like people didn't see anymore? They didn't look out. They looked down at the device in their hands, or in, mesmerized by the movie of the past and future, desires and fears always playing on the screen in their minds. The figure of the young woman was slim, erect, confident. She marched up the street, sure-footed, hands in her pockets, toed over her shoulder. When he moved out of the shadows and blocked her path, the young woman stopped short, backed up a step or two. He reached for her, as if to take her hand, but she wrapped her arms around her middle. There were words she couldn't hear, an exchange, sharp at first, then softer. On the air, far away, they sounded like calling birds. What was he doing? Fear was a cold finger up her spine. He moved to embrace the girl and she shrank away, but he moved in anyway. In the night, he was just a looming specter. His bulk swallowed her tiny form, and together, in a kind of dance, they moved toward the door, at first jerking, awkward. Then she seemed to give in, soften into him. She let them both inside, and then the street was silent again. She stood frozen, unsure of what she'd seen. Later, when she'd realized what he'd done, who he truly was under the mask, she'd hate herself for staying rooted, hiding in the shadows, only watching. She'd tell herself that she didn't know then. She didn't know that beneath the mask, he was a monster.
Ooh, I love that you're using references of masks too with us so masked right now.
Yeah, that's true. And that was, 2 years ago, probably I was writing that. So yeah, it's definitely current.
I admire how dark you can go, like that. Some people they're not comfortable going to those like kind of dark places, but in just that, like there were so many primal things that happen in just that little paragraph, and it really
I go dark. I go real dark. I might start off dark. I don't know. It's always just been that's always been where my fascination lies. And I think, I live in the light, so I'm kind of the girl who's like, in the horror movie, going down the stairs into the basement because I heard a noise. Like everybody in the theater's like, no, get out. But I'm like, no, I really want to see what's down there. So that's me. I'm always looking for what was that noise under the stairs. I want to know what was there.
And you made a whole career out of it.
I have.
So follow whatever your curiosity leads you. I think that's wonderful.
Exactly.
Lisa, thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Thank you, Maureen. You're wonderful. I appreciate it so much.
We touched on a lot of topics. So thank you everyone for joining for episode 25. Wow, of Typewriter Talks. We'll be back next Tuesday with episode 26. And we are Keep St. Pete Lit. You can find out about all our writing classes and book clubs and poetry open mics at keepstpetelit.org. So thank you, Lisa. Thank you everyone for joining, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, everyone.